my question is, if you are in this council, what would you advise, or what would you put, what measures would you put to make sure that when we have rains, we don't have a lot of floods, and that water is not tapped anywhere, and all of a sudden, again, we have a very bad drought, which people are dying of hunger, our animals are dying, and I'm sure if we tap and this water and store it like many other countries, because we have a lot of water that goes into ocean just from our country with a lot of floods, and they have all this. What would you advise, or what would you be able to do if you are sitting in this council to make sure that the water does not just go and the droughts are so bad after a while?
It is almost biblical in climate change discourses. This whole idea that industrialized countries are responsible for the bulk of greenhouse emissions, and therefore they are under duty and obligation to actually provide some of the resources. Yes, it is true. I've had it said very many times in many COPs, not just COP27, COP also was in COP26. But what I want to tell you is I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and the truth of the matter is that member states of the United Nations have to build their capacity for financial uptake. We have seen national communications and requests to the GCF, most of it based on guesswork. A number of countries do not have internal fiduciary capacities to handle. I remember one country, which I don't want to mention, submitted requests for almost $30 billion, or otherwise they would be clearing their entire tropical forest. My recommendation would always be, yes, it is true that countries in the global south, like Kenya or Africa, have contributed less than 0.04% of the emissions. It is true, but I would really be hoping that my colleagues in the council and the ministry and the government at large will be listening to the importance of developing proper internal capacities for financial uptake. You know that the structure for accessing global funding, much as it has been said in podiums, is very complex. It is fairly complex. If you just bring, I'm sorry, if you just bring and you say that, oh, you are MP for this, so and so goes there, they will not crack it very quickly. You know, there are entities that the Global Fund has created, nationally designated authority, national accredited authority. There are formats, there's kinds of consultations that have to be done. In fact, so you need to build that capacity. Be able to, I've always told the Ministry of Environment, you have to have credible proposals that are beyond reproach. So I hope when we build that, then we can be able to table our request for finance, both globally, but of course also expanding domestic resource mobilization. The UN is now calling a lot for domestic resource mobilization capacities, particularly in collaboration with the private sector, but you have to sensitize them. The other question about what I might call the wetlands, which are being degraded. This is true. My short answer would simply be that, in fact, this is why I pitched on Article 6 and Article 12. These are not problems that are simply going to be solved from top to bottom, that I have the knowledge. There is the methodology, Honorable Senator, that you know now. There must be co-creation. And this also answers the question the Honorable Member there is asking me. You must co-create with indigenous communities. There is no knowledge that will come from up and you are not really engaging them. So Article 6 and Article 12 of both the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement are fundamental in making sure that you do stakeholder consultation, particularly with local communities that are affected, so that you can actually reach solutions. Some of the problems that have been there in the past, particularly in wetlands and deltas, there are also global programs, which our system, especially our ministry and the council, must be able to tap into. There are global programs, even now I know some supported even by our bilateral donors, to try and help communities actually restore wetlands, marine ecosystem. The whole issue of marine planning is now a big issue. But we must be organized in such a way that we are aware of these resources and so on, and therefore enable our country.
As members of now Environment Committee, and now of course with the change in that aspect of the name of the ministry to climate change, is environment and climate change. And being members, we also don't want to look like we will just be sitting. Maybe you can advise whether there are some short courses on matters related to climate change that members can be able to enroll and be able to, so that they can also get the theory part and now bring what my dear sister is saying, the practical part of it. So that is one of the issues, is where there are some, for purposes of just knowledge to the members. Secondly, in your view, the 15 billion trees in 10 years, what effect will it have on the climate change? The 15 billion tree planting and growing, as pronounced by the President. What effect will that have to the, on matters related to climate change? Two, looking at the Act, the National Climate Change Act, there is too much executive in the Council. There is too many executive. The President is the chair, his deputy is the vice, and then so many other ministries, and only 4 of you from the outside executive. What is your view? Is it something that, in your view, you think will bring positive change, or we need more inclusion of, like now, of course, you're coming from the public, but even the local, ordinary Kenyan, somewhere in Mandera, but is involved in matters to do with climate change.
The Paris Agreement, and pardon me for forgetting the Paris Agreement, you know, came at a very historic time because consensus had deluded the global community for quite some time. You know that former President of the United States was dilly-dallying about these matters, and you know that took the energy out of that. And so when Paris Agreement signed by, I think if I remember correctly, almost 194 states, that is huge in the global community. It is critical because it is the binding agreement that creates the global instrument that a country like Kenya must domesticate. A key outcome that I mentioned of the Paris Agreement, the vehicle through which the Paris Agreement is implemented in member states, is the nationally determined contributions. And this is something that depends on the specific country, and it depends on the scientific analysis of how much greenhouse gas you anticipate. I'm afraid that we didn't have I'm not too sure we had the scientific rigor to inform our national determined contributions. Again, you know, global instruments expects you to, it's voluntary. How you respond is voluntary because you have yourself acceded to the particular convention. But I do know that there is need for bigger scientific rigor because it gives countries, including ours, the chance to actually indicate, for example, we indicated that we will reduce our emissions by 30%. Later on, of course, I saw the national communication, the ministry decided that it was 32%. Well and good, but when you do the analysis, as I know some of our colleagues have done, you find that it's an extremely ambitious one. Because in developing countries, we need to balance the developmental approach. You will still need to create some emissions if you survive, but it's normally a very controversial